Hi, I'm Clinton Jones, Michigan State University College Hall of Fame in football and track and field, and also National College Football Hall of Fame. We were national champions in 1965 and 1966. You're watching Duffy Doherty's Milestone Minutes with Tom Shanahan. Go Green!
Invited me to come, and I was excited about that. I also learned that Wake County does have my books.
Yes,
Which I didn't know, because when Ray of Light first came out and I inquired about that, they gave me about 20 hoops to jump through, and so I kind of gave up, but I guess they do have the books now. But anyways, thanks for coming. I was terrified the rain was going to kill the crowd, and it certainly did, more so for these guys for showing up. Thanks to them, more so than for me. But this is Jimmy Ray, South from Fayetteville, the South's first black quarterback to win a national title. Rode Duffy Doherty's Underground Railroad from Fayetteville, coached 37 years in the NFL, and was the second coordinator in NFL history when the Rams made him their offensive coordinator in 1983. That recent, 1983, there were no coordinators. John Robinson, Los Angeles Rams hired him. And Tony Dungy considered Jimmy a mentor. I've had a lot of people. Tony Dungy wrote the foreword to Ray of Light, and I wish I had a nickel for every time somebody said, "How did you get Tony Dungy to write the foreword?" And I suggested to Jimmy that Tony Dungy would be a great candidate. He called up Tony, and Tony said okay, and I think I have a copy within 2 days, certainly within a week. And then Charlie Young, Earl Edwards was a Michigan State assistant coach with Duffy Doherty, and Earl Edwards desegregated North Carolina State's program with walk-on players in 1966 and 1967, Marcus Martin, and then Clyde Chesney, who was attending NC State as a student, but he was from Jimmy Ray's high school at E.E. Smith, and when he saw the success that Jimmy was having, he decided to come out for the team, and he made the team, and he made academic All-American. He was the first black player in the ACC to make all academic honors. And then he was kind of a guiding light a couple years later when Charlie Young and Willie Burton has passed away, were the first black scholarship players from Enloe. And Clyde kind of helped you guys adjust to being on a campus that had very, very few black students back then, not to mention a few black athletes. And then Gary Dilley here is an Olympic silver medalist in swimming. Whoa. You're probably, what's he doing here? Well, a silver medal is good enough. But he's going to kind of talk about Michigan State as an integration leader, because he gets to Michigan State in 1963. And, the Civil Rights Acts weren't signed until 64 and 65 about equal housing and all that. But Michigan State was already grooming black athletes and white athletes, black students and white athletes. And Gary comes from this small town in Indiana, and he finds, he checks into his room, the football practice had already begun. And so he sees these giant shoes in the closet. And then later, he finds out his new roommate is Gene Washington, a black guy from segregated Houston, Port, Texas. And so it was as new for Gary as it was for Gene. And so I'm going to have Gary talk about that, Michigan State's leading role in that way. I want to point out Tracy Pasteur. She is the daughter of Ernie Pasteur, who also came on the Underground Railroad from North Carolina, and was teammates with Jimmy Ray. And her story is a second generation story from the opportunities that Duffy Doherty gave all these players, and otherwise we would have gotten a chance. Some of these stories you're going to hear, they kind of started in 1964, and you're going to wonder why you don't hear the story stories, why you don't know more about him. And the reason is it's a sports journalism failure. In the 1960s, the sports media failed to document black milestones. They didn't want to alienate advertisers and subscribers, so they just didn't know them. And a perfect example of that is Jimmy Ray was the South's first black quarterback to win a national title. Not only was that not written about at the time, Michigan State didn't promote it. And they just didn't pay attention to stuff like that. And another milestone was in 1964, Duffy Daugherty brought Michigan State down to North Carolina, and they were the first fully integrated team to play in the South at Kenan Stadium. And Clinton Jones was the first black player to score a touchdown in Kenan, and Gene Washington also scored that day. So, and then another thing about 1964 is that was the year Wake Forest decided they were going to desegregate. Their coach Bill Tate came from Illinois, and there was a big star from Jacksonville. The black high school was Georgetown, and his name was Bob Grant. And Jimmy and Bob had played against each other in high school, and Duffy had recruited Bob Grant as well as Jimmy, and Bob thought he was going to Michigan State. And then all of a sudden, Wake Forest makes the bold decision to desegregate in 1964. KKK is still around, and not to mention Jim Crow. And Illinois contacted Bob Grant's high school coach, who Bob Grant had great respect for, and Bob told him about Wake Forest wanting to recruit him, and Bob said, why would I go to Wake Forest? Because they only won one game the previous season. And I'm going to go to Michigan State and win the national title. And Bob's coach said to him, no, Wake Forest wants to make history here. They want to open doors for future black kids, and you can help do that. And so Bob changed his mind and went to Wake Forest along with a guy from Greensboro named Butch Henry, and they were both stars for Wake Forest. So all that 1964 history, that's basically lost to history. If you watch ESPN, they'll tell you that Darrell Hill at Maryland was the first black player in the ACC. Back then, Maryland was an ACC school. Well, Darrell Hill was a senior transfer. In other words, he was a polished product, kind of like what you see in the NIL now. And Maryland didn't recruit more black players until later in the decade. Wake Forest recruited Bob Grant, Butch Henry, who turned out to be stars, and then a third guy named William Simon, whose career didn't pan out. But they recruited 3 black guys in that 64 class, and they continued to do it every year, including a guy named Freddie Summers, who was the first black quarterback, starting black quarterback in the South at Wake Forest. So that's a lot of the lost history that you can find in my books, and I'm going to show you a video later that we're hoping to produce a documentary that will tell this and kind of break through, tell this lost history that needs to be told. I want to read one quote here from David McCullough, a Pulitzer Prize winning historian, that kind of explains why this stuff is important. How can we know who we are and where we are going if we don't know anything about where we have come from and what we have been through? The courage shown, the cost paid to be where we are, David McCullough. And that's one thing that a lot of people overlook is the courage that these guys had to show in the Jim Crow era, just to exist. Bob Grant talked about playing at Auburn, and they pulled in, and everyone's waving the Confederate flag. They threw bags of urine at them. Warren McVay at Houston played through death threats. Jerry Levias at Southern Methodist played through death threats. At Texas, when SMU played at Texas in 1966, Jerry Levias was a sophomore, my freshman were eligible back then. The Texas fans were waving nooses at him. They all thought it was funny. So, you remember the story with Bubba Wallace, the NASCAR driver, where they found a noose in his garage? So, it was no longer a funny story, but it still exists. You know, one more quote I want to read here before we get started, and then we'll have Q&A. Reverend Jesse Jackson, of course, recently died, and I posted a story on this on my website. When I was writing and researching Ray of Light, I knew his history, that he is from South Carolina, and he had gone to Illinois. Illinois had black players dating to the 50s like some other Big Ten schools. But what people don't understand is Illinois and all these other schools, they didn't want more than a half dozen black players. Duffy Daugherty was the first one to ignore these unwritten quotas. And for example, in 1962, the Associated Press, in a rare example of reporting on race, reported that Michigan State's 17 black athletes was the most in major college football history. That same year, 1962, USC won the national title with only 5 black players. And so that was the difference between Michigan State and the rest of the country. So anyways, Jesse Jackson went to Illinois for a year, and then he later finished his career at North Carolina A&T. But knowing that he knew a little bit about the Big Ten and Michigan State, I made a cold call to his office in Chicago. And keep in mind, I don't work for the New York Times or Sports Illustrated. I didn't know if I'd get a call back. And about a week later, his assistant called me and said, "Do you still want to talk to Reverend Jackson?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so his quotes are in page 1 of Ray of Light. But this is one of the things he said. It gives you an example of the pressure Jimmy was under when he was the only black quarterback in the country at Michigan State in the mid-60s. "Jimmy Ray was one of my heroes." That's Jesse Jackson. "We pulled for him. There weren't many black quarterbacks in the pipeline then. We knew that people like him had tremendous pressure on them. They had not to just play, but perform better than their competitor. We knew there would be alumni pressure to play the white quarterback, and Jimmy would have to sit. We knew there were 2 sets of rules." So that's quite a quote from Reverend Jackson. And indeed, Duffy Daugherty did get some resistance from the alumni. When he was speaking to a group of boosters once, and Jimmy was a sophomore backup to an All-American, although he played a lot as a sophomore. So it kind of looked like he was going to step into that starter role. And the booster said to Duffy Daugherty, "It's okay, you got all these black players, but I don't know about a black quarterback. We want a black quarterback." And Duffy Daugherty invited the guy to come up with him. He said, "I'll punch you in the nose." So I guess we'll start there. Jimmy, talk about leaving Fayetteville in 1964, the influence of Duffy Daugherty, and just what he meant to your careers, not only as a player, but a coach.
I graduated high school in 1964 in Fayetteville. One of the reasons that I had an opportunity to play at Michigan State, or go to Michigan State, was at that time they had the North Carolina-South Carolina Shrine game, but the black players had the East-West Shrine game for black players. And that was in Durham, North Carolina. And I won the most valuable player award for that game. And the guy that presented the award, the trophy for the most valuable player, was an assistant coach from Michigan State named Kyle Stone. And that started my recruiting. And then when I was supposed to visit Michigan State in November of '63, the weekend I was supposed to go, President Kennedy got killed. And they canceled the game against Illinois and Dick Buckus and Dick Buckus' Illinois team, and my trip got canceled and I didn't go and visit until they rescheduled the game, and I didn't go visit until later. And when I got there, I saw the class ahead of me that had Gene Washington in '63, Clinton Jones, Bubba Smith, George Webster from Anderson, South Carolina, Ernie Pasteur from Beaufort, North Carolina, Jimmy Summers from Orangeburg, South Carolina, Jimmy Garrett from Columbia, South Carolina, and I thought, wow, this is pretty good. But I really wanted to go to Minnesota because I knew they would play a black quarterback, because Sandy Stevens, who was the first, I saw Sandy Stevens play in the Rose Bowl in 1962, and a good friend of mine that went to Greensburg that way named Charlie Sanders, who's in the Hall of Fame for football Hall of Fame, tight end for Detroit Lions. We went to Minnesota together to visit, and his cousin was a basketball player at Minnesota. His name was Lou Hudson. You might have heard of sweet Lou Hudson. And Sandy was the quarterback. He was the first black All-American quarterback in the country. In 1962, won the Rose Bowl. And I got to Michigan State, and I had heard of, through the pipeline of all of these guys from South Carolina, particularly Jimmy Garrett. And he was a great high school quarterback in Columbia, Booker T. Washington High School in Columbia, South Carolina. And during the time when I went to visit, all the black guys told me, if you want to play quarterback, don't come here. They'll switch your position. Because that's what happened previously with most of the guys they recruited, because what they did was they recruited athletes and then found a place for them to play offense and defense. Well, I never played defense, so I was going to be on the short end of that stick. So, my mom, after I got back and I told her I really liked it and I wanted to go, and they offered me a scholarship, so my mom asked Duffy, will he be a quarterback? Will he get to be a quarterback? And he said, his answer was, he'll be a quarterback until he decides he's not a quarterback. And that was kind of a double-edged answer, but it was enough for me to take the chance. When I got there, my freshman year, the first game of the year, my freshman year in 1964, was Michigan State versus North Carolina. And I had just taken a train 37 hours up to East Lansing to go to school. And the next couple of weeks, they were taking the plane back down here to North Carolina to play the Tar Heels in Keenan Stadium. And they lost that game. And North Carolina, I don't know, I think Ken Willard
Ken Willard played in the NFL a
long time. But they lost the game. And I remember them coming back. We were in the student union, and the team got back. And they were all dejected, and like Clinton had played well, and Gene had played well, and Steve Juday was the starting quarterback, and they were all down, and I was like, wow, I came up here to Michigan State, and the school 60 miles from me. I couldn't go to school there because they wouldn't give black athletes scholarships at that time in the ACC. So they went on to have a good year, and I went on to play freshman ball because at that time, freshmen weren't eligible for varsity football. And we took a good beating from the varsity. When they lost the game, we had to go up and scrimmage against them that next day because they took their anger out on us. I remember when I got there, they brought all the freshmen in eligibles and put us up in Case Hall. And the football fields had this big green tarp around them, so you couldn't see in and see the practices. And Bert Smith, who was the freshman football coach, came in and roused us all up and said we're going over to watch the varsity, which was a big thing. And we walked across the street from Case to the field, and we went inside the gate, and I thought to myself, oh God, what did I get myself into? I mean, I'd never seen such big human beings in this in my life. I mean, it was like they were giants. But fortunate for for us, because we weren't eligible to play, we got to practice by ourselves. We didn't get beat up as much. But the interesting thing about leaving North Carolina, E. Smith was a segregated high school, and the first time being in the huddle with white players, calling the signals, calling the plays, it was a challenge that I was ready to accept, willing to accept. I didn't know how it was going to turn out when I left, but I was out of options the way I looked at it. And the freshman coach, Bert Smith, assigned me to a graduate assistant coach. His name was Jim Provostow, who was a former quarterback that had gotten his knee blown out, and he finished his scholarship as being a freshman coach. And he took the painstaking time of teaching me the nuances of the offense and how the system worked. But prior to the time we got to practice, and when I was on my recruiting visit, I recall, we weren't allowed to eat in a restaurant in Fayetteville, in North Carolina. And the first time they put me up in Kellogg Center, which was a hotel on campus, and Vince Carolot, who was an assistant coach, told me he would meet me that morning for breakfast downstairs at 9 o'clock. And so I got downstairs a little bit early, and I was thinking, should I go in here or not? So I decided that I wasn't going to go in. I was going to wait outside for him. So the lady, the hostess at the desk, she said, "Are you waiting for Coach Carolina? Are you a football player?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yes, I am. I'm a recruit." She said, "Come on in." So I went in and I sat down, and the whole while I'm sitting there, I was thinking, somebody's going to come up to me in the back and tell me, "You know you're not supposed to be in here." that was the thought running through my mind, because that's what happened in Jim Crow down in Fayetteville, North Carolina, in the South. But Vince took me in. Vince came in, and it was the first time that I had really ever ordered off of the menu. And so I'm going over the menu and looking at it, and he figured out that maybe I wasn't sure. So he said, "The blueberry pancakes are great." And I said, "That's what I have." Blueberry pancakes. But it was both interesting and as I think back on it, I didn't know how difficult it was when I was going through it. I faced a lot of challenges in terms of the stacking of the quarterbacks. I was voted the most valuable freshman athlete, freshman football player on the freshman team, and had ascended my way up to the top. And then we go to spring ball, and we go in the locker room, and they put up the list by positions of first team, second team, third team, and I was on the 9th team. And I said, all the guys that I had gone by in the freshman season, they were all back up on top of me. And I thought, he said, "You'll be a quarterback until you decide you don't want to be one." So the first couple of practices, spring scrimmages, I didn't get a snap. I didn't get in at all. And I thought, this ain't good at all. So I called my dad and said, I'm not out of here. And he said, "Nothing good has been accomplished by ever quitting and leaving. You stay there and you make the best of it." And so I did. And then the next week, 2 of the guys ahead of me got hurt, and they were down to 2 or 3 that couldn't play, shouldn't have been playing, and they said that 20 minutes left into the scrimmages, they told me to go in there, just get in there. And I went in there and did really well. And then the next week, started the scrimmage. We played, and I ended up winning the outstanding player of the green and white game that year as a sophomore, and won the backup job to Steve Juday, who was an All-American quarterback. And we were fortunate enough to win 10 games. We went undefeated, number one in the nation. And I had played an awful lot that year. It was when Steve was struggling, I went in and played. And we went all the way to the Rose Bowl. We won national championship. We went to the Rose Bowl and played UCLA. And they upset us. They beat us 14-12. And in that game, Steve was having one of those days that quarterbacks have. He couldn't do anything right. And normally when that happened, definitely put me in the game. And then we get going. But for some reason that day he called me up to go in and he didn't put me in. I stood there and he had his hand in the neck of my shoulder pad. He said, he didn't put me in. So I went back to sit down. He called me up again. This was all in the first half. Called me up again and didn't put me in. Called me up again, didn't put me in. So half ended, we go into the Rose Bowl tunnel and we go to the quarterbacks split from the team and go over with Duffy. When Duffy came in to talk to the quarterbacks, and he came in and he said, Jimmy, you're going to start the second half. And I said, okay, good. So the quarterbacks filed out behind the team. The team went ahead and the quarterbacks were behind the team with him. And he pulled me aside and he said, I know what I said in there, told the team, but I'm going to give Steve one more series and see if he can get going. He said, I know you don't understand it, but when you become a senior, you will understand. Because in that deal, and back in that time, which is different now, he always said that the best thing about a sophomore is to become a junior. And he was about to put me in the game, and I was thinking, if I don't, I said, if I don't get into this game, I probably won't play quarterback anymore at Michigan State. So finally we were down 14-0 with about 6 minutes to go, and the game was out of reach, and he said, get in there. And I went in, and we scored twice. Brought the game back, and we made it. Now that I've coached, I didn't know then, but we made a decision, a bad decision after the first score. We went for 2. And we should have kicked the field goal. The extra point, the big 14-7, and then when we scored the second time, we could have had the option to tie it or
go for 2.
Go for 2 to win it. But we chose to go for 2 the first time, and then we scored the second time, and that's when the famous play by the UCLA defensive back, Bob Stiles. He called me to the sideline and he said, Jimmy, tell the referee to put the ball on the left hash. And I said, okay. He said, and you run scrun option at 9. And whatever you do, pitch the ball to Bob. Bob Appeasley was an All-American fullback from Hawaii. And I started on the field, he pulled me back. He said, do you understand what I said? Pitch the ball to Bob. And I said, okay, got it. And so I go out there, and I didn't know that you could move the ball from the middle hash to either side in the 2-point in the point conversion. We moved the ball to the left hash, and we run our numbering system was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which 9 was to the right. And so we run sprint option at 9, and it all flew out, and I couldn't turn up and run the fade there. But like a good soldier, I pitched it to Bob, and Bob got hit and stopped about a yard short of the 2-point conversion, and we ended up losing the game. But we had already been declared national champions, and bowl games back then was a bonus. So we were already the national champion, but that was the blemish on our record, the UCLA game. And it was very disappointing. I think we took UCLA a little light. We partied a lot out in California. We went out 3 weeks ahead of the game because it was so cold in Michigan. And back then, the Big Ten had a no repeat rule that if you went to the Rose Bowl in '65, if you won the championship in '66, you couldn't go back. They had a no repeat rule because they were after the academic part of it, which was stupid. But anyway, that led up to the infamous 10-10 tie against Notre Dame. The next year we went undefeated, and the last game of the year, Notre Dame was undefeated, Terry Hanratty and Jim Seymour. And the game was in East Lansing, and it was billed as the game of the century. We had a lot of black players, and they had one black player on their team, Alan Page, who went on to play with the Purple People Eaters and became the Supreme Court judge in the state of Minnesota. And I think we started, our entire backfield was black, except for Bobby Pisa, who was an Hawaiian. And on defense, we probably had 7 starters.
Yeah, Michigan State had 20 black players, 11 starters, 11 black starters, 7 on defense, and 2 black team captains, George Webster and Clinton Jones, both in the college football. They voted by a predominantly black roster, and then Jimmy Ray is the South's first black quarterback to win the national title. Notre Dame had 1 black player. Remember I told you about the unrated quota? It was Alan Page. As late as 1967, a year later, USC won the national title, and they only had 7 black players. And the difference was, if you were a school like USC and you had a quota limitation, you were only going to recruit what we call today 5-star or 4-star recruits. So we had O.J. Simpson and Mike Garrett won the Heisman Trophy for USC, and they're scoring all the touchdowns. And Earl McCullum played in the NFL for a long time, and people think, well, USC must have a lot of black players. And they didn't. They had less than a half dozen. And it wasn't until the late 60s that other schools began to follow. But yeah, that was a watershed moment because 33 million people saw it, record TV audience. And then after that, more schools began to ignore the quota limitations. I want to move on to this 1964 game. Michigan State at North Carolina. And we all know in North Carolina about Dean Smith and Charlie Scott leading integration in basketball. But that wasn't until 1968, 67-68 season. And basketball was nowhere near as popular as football. They didn't show the first national championship basketball game on TV until '63. But Dean Smith is a nice little story with Charlie Scott, 1 coach, 1 player. It's easy to repeat, it's easy to tell, and it slopes into college football more. It's a lot harder story to tell what Duffy Doherty was doing at Michigan State, what Wake Forest was doing in 1964. So a lot of guys get left out of history, and one of those guys was Jim Tatum. He was the coach at North Carolina when they played at Michigan State in 1962 and 1963, and then Michigan State came down to Chapel Hill in 1964. And Ken Willard says that because North Carolina had played against the black athletes It wasn't a big deal for them when they came down to Michigan State, but it was a big deal at other schools. Remember I told you about Darrell Hill was the first black athlete in the ACC in 1963, and he was the victim of cheap shots when they went to the ACC stadiums, verbal fan abuse. His mom went to Clemson, the game at Clemson, drove down from Maryland, and they wouldn't let her into the stadium. The president had been pushing for integration, and he heard about it. He went down and brought her back up to his box. For that reason, because of the stories, two guys making their varsity debut were from South Carolina, were George Webster, College Football Hall of Famer, and Jim Summers, both from South Carolina. Jim was a starter, played in the NFL. And they told their parents to stay home because they're afraid of how they would be treated in the stadium. That's how prevalent it was. And this great story about North Carolina that doesn't get told. Dean Smith, of course, is a very pivotal and important person, but this is also an important pivotal moment that is lost to history. The great part of that story is the Michigan State players said they didn't hear none of the N-word. Fans were not abusive to them. They didn't have any problem. As I said earlier, Ken Willard thought that was because they had been exposed to playing against black athletes. And this is where I want to bring in Gary Dilley. I mentioned about how he and Gene Washington were roommates, and it was just routine at the time for black. It wasn't unusual at all. And remember, I told you Gary's from a small, all-white town in Indiana, so it was a big transition for him too. But just talk about how Michigan State was just so far ahead of the game.
At least my experience with Gene and the rest of the team, I've got several stories I can tell that are a little on the humorous side. My whole freshman year, I was the call answering service for Gene Washington. I don't know how the women found out his phone number or whatnot, but Gene wouldn't answer the phone. And so it was me, and for the first quarter, we had a second athlete in our room, and we answered the phone for him the whole time. I mean, he just wouldn't do it. Gene was probably the best roommate I had in college, without a doubt. I asked him to go and room together later on during our junior and senior years, and by that time he had joined the fraternity and whatnot, and so he passed on that. But Gene was, I said, as about a perfectly human being as you can possibly get. Again, kind of a side story. Gene ended up marrying his high school sweetheart, Claudia. And like I said, Gene was as true blue, or whatever color you want to use, to her as you could be. He didn't date, he didn't do anything else. Unbelievable. So, two little quick things. As colorblind as Duffy Doherty was, a person behind him was the president of the university, John Hanna. And John Hanna was, I would say, a force behind the scene. First of all, he was behind all athletes. He would come over to the varsity club meetings and all this type of stuff. If you passed him walking across campus and he recognized you being an athlete, he'd say hello. He may not know my name or anybody else's name, but he knew you did something. And so I think that was a force. The other thing that talked about was the Jimmy Ray, when it would be my freshman year, when he was up supposedly visiting against Illinois. The game got canceled because of the JFK assassination, so they put the game on Thanksgiving weekend. And I stayed up there, and I sat in the freshman end zone. That's where our seats were. And I literally saw Dick Buckless tear Michigan State apart. If he hadn't been there, we'd have won the game. But I mean, he was all over the damn field. It was unbelievable. Two other kind of humorous stories. We mentioned Bubba Smith. I've got two of them on him. Bubba was kind of a complainer. I mean, each workout he thought that he had worked his tail off the whole time. We'd come down because the swimming team got done with their practice about the same time the football team did. So we'd all sit around these big, 8-person or 10-person tables. And Bubba would just bitch the whole time about how hard he had worked. And after 3 or 4 sessions like this, I went up to Bubba and I said, Bubba, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will walk through your practice. I'll hit the dummies, I'll run sprints, and I'm not going to get hit, but I'll go through one of your practices if you'll come over and go through one of my practices. You won't have to be timed or anything like that. No big deal.
I like this.
He said, Dilly, that's a deal. So, about 3 weeks later, the swimming pool has almost like a miniature football stadium. It had high seats going up. So we're in practice one day, and who walks up the very top line up there is Bubba Smith. And so I waved at him, and that night when we got done with practice and we ate to dinner, he came up to the table and said, "Bet's off, Dilly. No way. I can't go up and down there. I couldn't walk up and down there all that time." The other thing about Bubba, I was over in the office of the athletic director, and we're kibitzing back and forth, and all of a sudden the secretary puts a head in the door. Says, "You've got to take a call." And he looks up, and okay, so he takes a call. He's on the phone, and his head is shaking like this, shaking like this. He says, "We'll have to continue this later." Bubba Smith has his car parked in the president's parking spot in the administration building. And at that time, Bubba had a gold Buick Riviera, and it said Bubba on the side. There's no doubt when or where he was. But the integration thing was just not a big deal at Michigan State. I didn't see any of it at all. There were black and whites going out together, the whole deal. It was just a very pleasant place to be. I think, first of all, Michigan State was a very friendly university, period. If you went down on Michigan's campus, it was always cold as far as the personality of the university was. You walk across Michigan State's campus, and I didn't know Adam's odd apple, especially my freshman year, and yet people would say, "Hello, good morning, how are you?" This type of stuff. And it was just a much friendlier place to be overall. So, like I said, Duffy was as good a person as you could possibly get. I met him several times through Gene and whatnot. And the athletes that were there, the All-Americans, during my year with Webster and Gene and Clint, was as good as it got. I'm afraid to say that Jimmy suffered. Steve Jude, I think, benefited from the people around him. I don't think he was near the quarterback that Jimmy was. But because he'd come up and was 2 years ahead of you, I think, wasn't it, Jimmy? And so, like I said, he benefited from the immediate offensive people around him that made him look a whole lot better than really what he was. And his senior year was not a good year for Steve. He earned his stripes kind of before that, unfortunately. So that's what I've got to say.
Yeah, and I neglected to say that Gary, the reason he's here is he was a dentist in Cary for a long time. He retired now, of course. Also taught dental classes at North Carolina, right? And volunteer time as a North Carolina swimming coach. So I should have added that. I wanted to preface my remarks about how far ahead Michigan State was. As recently as the 80s, Michelle Obama, our first lady, she tells a story in her book about how when she went to Princeton as a freshman, I think in 1983, she was paired up with a white girl from Louisiana. And when the mom saw that, she insisted her daughter be moved to a different room. So that was 1980. So a lot of this stuff is entrenched, and it still creeps up, bubbles up to the top. One more thing I want to say about North Carolina before we move on is the coach at North Carolina was a guy named Jim Tatum. He wasn't the coach for the '64 game, but Jim Tatum had been the coach in the late '50s, and then he caught one of those infectious diseases from bugs. He'd get out in the forest and he died before, like a month before the '59 season. And the reason I bring that up is Jim Tatum would have been the guy who scheduled the games to bring Michigan State down, because typically those games back then were scheduled 5 to 10 years in advance. So that's something I need to research sometime. I never have had the chance. I did research with North Carolina that Clinton Jones was the first black guy to score at Kenan Stadium. There had been a couple of Notre Dame black players at Kenan, because remember the ACC was segregated, but they did not score touchdowns. They were linemen. So Jim Tatum deserves a lot of credit. But again, that's a complicated story to tell. It's an easy story to tell about Dean Smith and Charlie Scott. And I once had, and Dean Smith is a legitimate story, that's a true story. But the other reason Michigan State is lost to history is there's this fairy tale about the 1970 USC-Alabama game that Bear Bryant waved a wand in 1970, and that was the end of segregation. Well, that's a real easy story to tell, right? And it got repeated over and over and over. But actually, the myth wasn't made up until the early 90s. And it's another sports tourism failure that they never researched that story, and it just keeps getting repeated over and over and over. And it's at Duffy Doherty's expense and the other true pioneers in the South. And once I was on a Zoom call with Ken Burns, of course, he does all the greatest documentaries on history for PBS, and I was with others. And I expressed this frustration to him that I can't get traction on a true story. I'm buried by a myth about a guy who deserves zero credit. And Ken Burns said, in Americans, we like our stories tied up in a nice little bow. You can tell that Bear Bryant story, that Dean Smith story in a nice little bow, real quick, easy to repeat. The real story is a lot harder. And I hope we can get that documentary off the ground to tell it. Before we move on to Charlie, since we were on 1964, and remember I told you about Bob Grant. Bob Grant was looking forward to going to Michigan State, went to Wake Forest and cleared a road for future black athletes. One of the kids who was going to come today was committed to Wake Forest from Leesville Road. He's read my website and learned a lot about Bob Grant. I was going to have him comment, but he has a basketball game tonight. But Bob Grant was the first black player in the ACC to make all conference as a sophomore in 1966. He was the first black player from a major Southern conference drafted by the NFL in 1968. And he was taken in the second round by the Baltimore Colts, won a Super Bowl. But you don't know these stories, do you? You only know Dean Smith. And then, as I said earlier, Jimmy and Bob Grant were good friends. Tell us a little bit about Bob Grant. What a great guy he was.
Bob played, as you said, at Georgetown High School in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and he was always over on the Marine base. And Bob became a black belt in karate. He was excellent athlete, and we beat him all 3 years in high school, and I never let him forget it. Their main goal was to beat E.E. Smith when he was in high school. So he said, well, we can't beat you, so I'm going to join you. So he was coming to Michigan State, and then he and Butch Henry and the other black athlete, I think he was from Connecticut, that Tate recruited, he said I was too small. The guy that started the integration at Wake Forest to Butch Henry and Bob Grant. Bob became an academic All-American and a football All-American, became a lawyer. He was a head counsel for the NFL Retired Players Association. Tremendous guy, tremendous athlete, and he ended up playing linebacker in the Baltimore Colts on the team, and Bubba was the first player picked in the draft by Baltimore. And Bubba and Bob became fast friends through our relationship, and them being teammates together. Butch Henry was who played wide receiver at Wake Forest. Bush just recently passed about 2 months ago. He was living in Greensboro, and Bob passed. Right after that, did the pioneer recognition of him at Wake Forest doing the basketball game a couple of years ago.
It was not only a risk for him and Butch Henry, because they were pretty much alienated on campus and not everybody welcomed them. And like I said, the KKK was still around. And Bob Grant said, talking about Bill Tate, the coach, and I'm drawing a blank on the president at the time that told Bill Tate we're desegregating. He said, those guys were crazy. They could have had them cross the road on their yard. They could have been killed. But they went ahead and did it. Let's move on to Charlie here. And as I told you, Earl Edwards is a Michigan State assistant coach, and he desegregated the program. Charlie, talk about your experience with Willie Burden. I know you've told me you didn't really have any problems with race, but you guys were pretty much on your own. There weren't very many black students on the campus. And just about your experience desegregating the campus and opening doors for future black athletes.
I guess, when Coach Edwards and one other recruiters recruited us from Menlo, I became familiar with the state ironically through, I had injuries. I was settled with injuries through my high school senior year. And I had back injuries and ankle injuries, and one of the doctors said that, and I was a good sized fellow there. I was still about 6'1", 6'2", about 210, from like the 9th grade, 8th grade up. So, and I'm saying, you just grew fast as a youngster. Your body should catch up to you, or your age should catch up to how much you've grown. So some of the joints, just didn't work well. I had bad ankles, had back, so I would train at Enloe. I guess knew the trainers at State, which was Chester Grant and one of the other trainers over there. So I got to go over there and get treatment. So that's how I became familiar with State, and they became familiar with me. We didn't have a good football team at Enloe until like the senior year. I mean, we were terrible until our senior year. Then I think we won the division here. Fortunately, Coach Edwards, I think they noticed Willie and myself. I don't know together who was first or what. Anyway, I don't know. We both got a scholarship to State, together, we signed together the same day. And our experience over there was, it wasn't bad. As for racially, it wasn't bad. It was kind of lonely, and then socially, because there wasn't a lot of black students at State, and not a lot of black athletes. So, I was like the only black student in a lot of my classes for the first 2 years. And so, it was kind of depressing socially, and I'd go back home every weekend. I live across town, back in East Raleigh. Like I said, I'd save my 25 cents. I'd go home, and it's just like, it was another city. I was away from the city, and I'd come back on campus on Sunday. But we didn't have a lot of, racial incidents. I don't recall any. None of it is significant. You get a little ribbing. I didn't remember that much. I thought that maybe you talked about, I thought I was chastised a little bit in my French class from the students and a teacher, French teacher. But I don't know if that was racial. I can't prove that it was racial because they would talk. I remember the teacher and a couple students was making some comments, and I could tell about me because it was in French. So I honestly don't know if that was racial or not. It could have been because I wasn't as good in French as they were. So I had to think about that. It may not have been racial, but, and I remember in the dorm, we had a couple of players. They were older players. When they were made a year older than I was when I was a junior. And they had an incident with some of the white players. A couple of them were harassing. There were only like a few black students and black females that were harassing them. And we took up with them, and I remember me and Willie, we interceded, and we we shut that down immediately. I could have got in trouble, big trouble with that, because I think I grabbed this guy. He was a defensive end. He wasn't a big defensive end, but he was a tall, skinny guy. I don't even remember his name. And I picked him up, and we lived in Sullivan. And on each floor you have a balcony. You know, you go up and you have the outside runway in the room. There's a balcony. I think I picked him up and was about to hold him over the edge. I wasn't going to drop him, but I wasn't scared of him. And so I wanted to put him back down, and we were okay after that. But I didn't have any issues, I don't think, other than that I could think of with that. Playing with Clyde, he was, he was there. So, like I said, Clyde was kind of quiet, but, he taught us kind of, you could just see how to how to move through, being a black athlete of the state. So we learned a lot from him. But, and we had a great time at the state. That was some of the best times in my life. Excuse me, I have extremely dry eyes, so I'm not emotional yet. But, I mean, my eyes just run constantly. Anyway, we didn't have any incidents over the state. We just, it was great. It was great. Freshman year, like I said, we couldn't play freshman ball then. I think that might have been the last year, probably.
72 was the first year.
Oh, first year. Okay, so it might have been one more. But anyway, we had a coach. I can't think of the coach's name. His first name was Jim. He coached it. Went on to Marshall, I think. We had to be the best freshman team on the East Coast because he ran. I don't know what he had in his mind. He ran us to death. We had players, and I was one of them falling out on the field because we were running. We run so many wind sprints into the darkness of the night. It's getting fall, so it's getting dark. But I remember just laying under a tree one time and him yelling over, just get up, get up, get up. But we would beat teams, I don't care who it was, Carolina, Wake Forest. We beat their freshman team 50 to nothing. I mean, scores like that because we would just, we could play the game, but we never even breathed hard. So the only bad part about it was, we went undefeated as a freshman team, and only had 6 games as a freshman, 6, I believe. And so after our last game, man, you talking about being happy, man, we was just, it was no more football practice. We get to do what other students do. Go in, classes might have ended at 3 if you didn't have labs or some sort. You could go in the TV room in the dorm and watch Star Trek with everybody else. It's like, I had about a week of that, and Coach Edwards called. He made me and Willie come back and run on the scrimmage squad for the team, varsity team. We were pretty good running back, so we had to come back and run on the squad, the practice squad. We would look at the plays for the team that were going to play and run their plays. So that killed that part. That was tough to do. It was tough, but after that, and I was a little bit disappointed. I guess socially in my freshman year, and I had thoughts of leaving. I didn't know how to leave. Had no clue. I had a scholarship. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I was a little sad about that. But coaching had the coaching change. The next year when Lou Holtz came in, he talked to me and said, "What you gonna do?" I said, "I don't know how to go anywhere. I'm staying here." And the best decision of my life. We had 2 great years. Well, I did. And I said, Willie with Lou Holtz, being successful and going to bowl games. And so I don't think that I experienced any kind of racial tension, while playing football until I got to Dallas. I was drafted by Dallas behind Too Tall Jones. Ed Too Tall Jones, I was drafted behind him in the first round. And I remember the only time we had any racial tension was during the 4 years that I was there. During the off season, we had a basketball team. The players would play on the field. It was like 10 of us. Roger Staubach, Drew Pearson, Billy Joe Dupree, you know, a couple of those guys. We played basketball game against, you know, for you know, like radio personalities. You know, just a way of, you know, going out in the community, and they would make money, and people would come to see us play against them. And we would travel on a bus, you know, go to little small towns in Texas. And I remember one occasion, it was after the game, and we were on the bus going back home. We wanted to get something to eat. And we stopped at a restaurant, and lo and behold, we couldn't go in. I mean, this is the Dallas Cowboys. Players, you know, they cheer for you on the field. You know, you are the best. But we could not go in that restaurant. Roger and one other guy, I can't remember which player it was, had to go in and bring us out sandwiches so we could eat our sandwiches on the bus. And that was probably the one thing that I remember, you know, that, you know, when I saw, you know, discrimination, you know, firsthand. But other than that, you know, I didn't experience it that much. You know, some of the things that some of the other players had to go through. I never saw that. You know, that was pretty much, you know, how my story, you know, in football, and the 4 years at state, they had to be the best. I mean, even compared to, you know, playing in Dallas, and I was able to participate in 2 Super Bowls and all of that, you know, being a Dallas Cowboy, so that was great. But still, playing at state, it was just enjoyable. It was a great part of you know, of my life playing over state.
Yeah, and Charlie's teammate and friend Willie Burton played in the Canadian Football League. He's in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. And what were you guys called? They had 4 backs. The Stallions?
Yeah, it was, let's see, my second, when we were sophomores, 2 other guys, Stan Fritz, white running back, and Roland Hooks, another black running back, you know, came to state. And in those last 2 years, the 4 of us, the folks just kind of used us interchangeably, because we were kind of, you know, evenly talented. You know, I was probably the fastest of the group, but Willie was probably the toughest. But Willie also, I don't think he played defense, but he played defense freshman. Willie was a very talented athlete. I mean, he was a very good middle linebacker. But as a running back, he would interchange us, you know, as we played, you know, various teams, and we became known. I don't know how we named 4 Stallions, and you know, and other teams, you know, the other states, they paid attention to us because we beat a lot of good teams, and we were very successful, you know, with that. We were our senior year. We had an opportunity to become, you know, we were in the top 20 in the nation, but I remember we had to play Nebraska that year, Penn State, and Georgia. And I think Coach Holt said, you know, we had a chance to, you know, be the top team in the nation. If we could beat those 3 teams, he thought that was going to be automatic. And, you know, we played like we would. I think the closest was probably Nebraska. We held on tight in Georgia and Nebraska, and even Penn State. We played well, but we didn't have the numbers. We didn't have the numbers to play against. In the second half, you know, they would just, you know, whip us because we couldn't play with them. You know, they could run in players all day, usually the second half. I know it against Nebraska. You know, we I think scored first, probably led the first half, but you know, they just overtook us in the second half, and that was. Other than that, we could beat all the other teams. You know, played in 2 bowl games. You know, as a result, I think Peach Bowl and the Liberty Bowl during that time. So I was feel very fortunate, you know, in my athletic career to have played at state and been on such successful teams. You know, where you can play in bowl games and then move on to Dallas and play in bowl games and experience that. So it was a great experience. And the state started it all.
Yeah, and then really went on to be a professor at Georgia Southern. Clyde Chesley got his master's at Michigan State, was a vice president at East Tennessee. So look at the waste, human waste of the generation before these guys that didn't get these opportunities. And then the stories like that are innumerable at Michigan State. And one of them is Tracy Pastora is here with us. She's a project manager at Cisco. And Tracy's father, Ernie, was from Beaufort. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Beaufort, North Carolina. And he rode the Underground Railroad. He got hurt and didn't really have the career like Jimmy did, but he graduated and he set the foundation for his family. Tracy's here. Your other sister is she the CEO she's the top executive for Amway, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then their brother, EJ Jr., is a West Point graduate, retired captain. And so those were the opportunities Duffy gave kids. Because remember, I told you, John McKay at USC and Notre Dame, these other schools, they were only taking elite, top 5-star recruits. Jimmy Ray was considered undersized, but Duffy Doherty took him. And all these stories of Michigan State athletes setting the foundation for their family in the future. Tracy, if you could just talk about that for a little bit. Take my seat.
When you mentioned about Duffy talking to your mom, the moms are the ticket, okay? Duffy, I mean, my grandmother, I mean, he had her soul. It's like, you know, and so I think that's a thing. I mean, it's like, especially, you know, in our community, you know, the moms are the ones. As a matter of fact, my grandmother he had come from a family of, you know, 13, very, you know, large family, not a whole lot of money. And so my grandmother was like, you all are going to college. You know, we want you to be successful, so on and so forth. So, again, being recruited by Duffy brought him to Michigan. And he met so many wonderful teammates. And what I loved about that was that because they all came from maybe not a lot of money, and they were all there, they had to come together as a family. And so they became very close ties. And I benefited from that because as I grew up, you know, I saw these guys, they went on to have successful careers and whatnot, but they treated us like family. It wasn't like, you know, we're not starstruck because these people are famous or whatever. They still treated us like family. And, you know, they reached out and they helped us out. And, you know, I consider them, you know, my extended family as well. And so through this, my father, of course, made sure that we all went to college. He's like, you know, part of, you know, your job growing up is not if you're going to school, but what school are you going to go to, right? And of course, I went to the other school. But, you know, the thing about it was, you know, he was proud that, you know, his daughter went to a good school. And I'm going to be honest with you, because we would go to all the football and all the basketball games, I knew all the coaches, you know, at Michigan State. We would go to football, the basketball. I remember Jensen Fieldhouse, small, packed. I mean, and it was fun. I mean, and it was just a whole totally different, you know, experience. But I do really enjoy all the stories. My dad would have events for the extended football teams every year when they would come back to East Lansing. And again, it was, you know, great camaraderie. Whenever we had like a game or something, he would like put together some kind of an event so that people could get together. I mean, people are getting older, you know, and as we go along, you know, you don't want to lose those ties. And then, was it a couple of years ago when they got inducted to the Hall of Fame?
For the team?
Yeah, the team, yes, the only team, yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah, that was a really, really, I'm going to let you tell that story.
Yeah, well, Tracy's father and Don Witherspoon and Clinton Jones and a couple of other players. No president had ever been set where a team had been selected to go into Michigan State Athletic Hall of Fame. And it took a couple of 3 years, but eventually Ernie and Spoon and Clinton and myself, I was a part of that. Met with the president and the athletic director, and the president that was there said, "Why not?" to the athletic director. There had been no previous history of a team being put into the Athletic Hall of Fame, so they made a decision and invited us all back, and they put the 1965 and 1966 national championship team into the Michigan State Sports Hall of Fame. And all of the guys that, everybody knew about the name guys, but all of the guys that held the dummies and did the grunt work and had to practice and had to go through all of the stuff, they got their flowers for the 1965 and 66 team. And it was quite an honor and a great experience that took place.
Yeah, definitely. So all of those things just make it even more precious, right?
Thank you, Tracy.
Yep.
Guys,